Hey everyone, this is Uri for Guerrilla Poker, and today I'm gonna do a video that's a bit more strategy oriented, and I'm gonna tackle a very theoretical concept, but in very practical terms. So the concept I'm gonna tackle is squeezing pre-flop in a 6-max setting. What I want to do in this video is take a look at two ranges. They're both GTO calculated ranges by a preflop solver called Monker Solver. We'll just take a look at the range that the big blind would 3-bet against the cutoff, compare that to the range the big blind would 3-bet against cutoff open and bottom caller, so the squeeze range. And we'll look at these two ranges, and rather than try to memorize them, we'll try to make sense of the differences so that you guys will have kind of a heuristic for when you're playing in any situation, any position, how to alter your ranges when you're squeezing, and how to alter your ranges when you're responding to a squeeze. So let's get started. Okay, so first we're gonna look at a big blind versus cutoff 3-bet range. Yellow is call, white is fold, brown is 3-bet. Now don't mind the specific hands too much because every sim is gonna have a different rake structure and different open sizes. Everything's gonna be a bit different, so I wouldn't recommend anyone to use these ranges in his game. What we see here is that the range has a very clear value region of jacks, queens, kings, aces, ace, king, and ace, queen suited. And once we get through the value region, the range is a lot more polarized, with hands coming in kind of all over the place. There are a lot of suited connectors and suited aces, and there's this gap where hands like ace queen offsuit and king queen suited and king jack suited and ace jack suited are not necessarily 3-betting. So we're talking about kind of a polarized range. Now the idea of polarized ranges is a very, very old idea in poker, where you want to 3-bet your very best hands, and then after that you don't want to just 3-bet more and more and more good hands. You want to actually have bluffs. And there are various ways to approach which bluffs to take. Here we are looking at a GTO solution of preflop, so this is a good example of understanding why a hand like king queen suited is a bit in between. It also does really well in the calling range. It would really hate to get 4-bet. So you sometimes have these hands that are very strong but don't 3-bet, and that's what this range looks like. Now compare this to the squeeze range, and this is really what the video is going to be about. And we see a very, very dramatic difference in that the squeeze range becomes completely depolarized. You guys can see where before it was like a small value range, and then the rest is, you know, it has properties of being suited connectors or nice broadways, but it's kind of all over the place. Here, this just looks like, you know, it's a 10% 3-bet range. Let's take top 9% of hands or top 8% of hands, put all of them in there, and then mix in a few more hands at the edges of that range, but pretty much almost purely depolarized range. Before we had access to solvers, everyone would guess at the structure of the squeezing range. Should it be completely depolarized? I remember personally thinking it made sense to squeeze with offsuit hands because they play badly in multi-way pots, and maybe flat more suited hands, and there were all sorts of theories about what you should be doing here. But now we see the output, we see that it's very clear what the range should look like, and what's left is to make sense and understand why. And I think this is really, really important, because in game, if I just tell you this range is linear and this range is polarized, right? Linear is top X% of hands, just the best hands. Polarized is the very best hands, and then some more in-between junky stuff. Not necessarily the most junky, but like not just top range. So if we just throw those concepts around and you don't understand why, it's a lot more difficult to execute the strategy, and it's also a lot more difficult to feel comfortable with a strategy. When you squeeze, there is the original raiser who has the same range as before, but the times he folds, there's the called caller sitting there behind, and his range is filled with pocket pairs and suited broadways and suited connectors that are going to be calling your squeeze. So overall, when you squeeze, you're gonna get to see the flop a lot more often, and it's very often gonna be against a hand type like 10-9 suited, 6-5 suited, pocket sevens, a lot more often because of the properties of the cold calling range. So for this reason, we really want to make a range that just does as well as possible against the cold calling range, right? Where before, if you guys look at the 3-betting range, do we rather want 10s or 9s? And you know, both have merit. But here, because we're gonna get called by all the deuces through 7s, we want 9s, we want 10s, like it's very much in order. We want ace-jack suited because we're getting called by worse suited aces a lot more often. So everything is a lot more clear-cut than it was before. Now, my explanation now is a bit hands in the air explanation. It's not robust, it's not scientifically proven. If we were to look at the ranges, we would see that the cold caller of the squeeze would call the squeeze with a bunch of, like we said, pocket pairs, suited connectors, suited broadways. And he would be calling 57% of the time. So to me this makes sense because you get to the flop a lot more often. That means you want stronger hands, you're going less for the immediate fold equity when you squeeze. More gonna see the flop versus playable ranges, and then you just need stronger hands, and it's more important to push equity. I think this is kind of the big picture of how to squeeze, and I think you can see it very exactly here in a very clear way. In any other position pair we choose, you're gonna see the same structure, where the big blind's 3-betting range in general is good hands plus a variety of bluffs. But when you squeeze, because you're gonna see the flop a lot more often, we barely want to bluff. We mostly just take top X% of hands and just go with those. And that is the best way to do it. Once we understand that, and that's a lot of what I want you guys to take away from the video, there are a few more things that are worth looking at in terms of squeezes. One, what is the 4-betting range against a squeeze versus what is the 4-betting range against a normal 3-bet? And once you see the ranges, you can start to think about what you expect the reactions to look like before looking at the solver. And I think this is a very important exercise for everyone to do, is to exercise your mind, because we're not going to memorize all these things as a list. We want to really understand them. So against a very linear range, generally what I would expect is very linear 4-betting. You can't really 4-bet bluff with 6-7 suited or, you know, king-9 suited against this kind of range. The range just has a lot of equity, so you need your 4-bets to have a lot of equity. And against this type of range, similarly, the original raiser will probably have to fold a lot more pocket pairs and suited connectors and suited broadways, because the range is just designed to beat those. So I'd expect two different types of reactions from the raiser. One, 4-betting more linear, more 4-betting with hands like queens and ace-king. And number two would be just folding a lot more with suited connectors, pocket pairs, and suited broadways. On the other hand, the big blind's 3-betting range, that's a lot more all over the place. You don't need to 4-bet as linear. If you look at this range, where it's 3-betting jacks plus for value, more or less, 4-betting queens, for example, wouldn't make that much sense against this specific range. So we'd expect more of a mix. And similarly, you could call more suited connectors and pocket pairs. Everything's a lot more speculative. You could 4-bet bluff with weaker hands because the other guy has weaker hands himself. So those are the things that we want to keep in mind. And now, having said that, let's take a look at the 4-bet ranges for both. So in the spot where I expected lots of folds with suited connectors and broadways, this is against the squeeze. You guys can see deuces through 7s are often folding, even 8s is sometimes folding. Calling any suited connector almost never happens, and even queen 10 suited, jack 10 suited, queen jack suited, all these hands are folding. And the 4-bet range, like we said, is very linear, so we have all the ace kings, bunch of ace queens, queens and jacks, and then a few bluffs. if you go to the response to a normal 3-bet, we're gonna see a lot more speculative calls. So suited connectors are getting in there, suited broadways are never folding, suited aces are getting in there. A lot more pocket pairs than before, which is what we expected. And when we look at the 4-betting range, we can also see that it's a lot more polarized, right? Against a linear range, you respond in a linear fashion, and against a polarized range, you respond in a polarized fashion. So 4-betting is actually not happening with queens and jacks almost at all. Ace king is slow playing a lot. And like we said, these all make sense when you look at the 3-betting range to begin with, and you see that it's like tight in very good hands. Then hands like kings or queens or ace king are a lot more interested in just seeing a flop rather than going for a pre-flop all in against, you know, a lower equity bluffing range. Okay, that is more or less what I want to cover in this video. This video is a bit of a teaser for some of the things to come. On the Guerrilla Poker website, we're selling pre-flop charts and also a pre-flop course where I walk you guys through the logic of some of these charts, so it doesn't seem like too much information. We're gonna walk through a lot of the situations, explain the logic so you guys can use these things and take them from format to format. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. Feel free to ask any questions about what I showed, and feel free to disagree with my explanation, but keep in mind that when we're looking for explanations for solver outputs, we don't really have to prove anything because we already have the answer. We're just trying to make sense of it, and we just need the way that we make sense of it to be consistent. So as long as this pattern repeats itself in other situations, and I'm sure that it does, the explanation is good enough if you guys find it good enough, and then we integrate it, we know how to do it without memorization, and we get to improve our games and move on.